Oh, anticipatory. Oh, is that works? Yes. Oh, it's gone. Just gone 7, so I think that's the instruction to begin. So it's my great pleasure to welcome you all to this evening's talk. We're calling it a Lent event. You know, we like a little bit of jingle with the words there. But a very special and very different kind of event. I mean, it's a lecture / talk / what else would it be? Input. Oh, this is posh now. You're about to have an experiential engagement. Beyond the veil, spiritual and near-death experiences across faiths. And our guest tonight is Marianne Rankin. Marianne I've known for quite some time, don't know how many years. We've cross paths every now and again at various gatherings. I think that's maybe the best way to put it. But Marianne spent a long time studying the business of religious experience because for many people, it's not a sort of a kind of term that immediately you say, oh yes, I think I know what that is. It can mean different things, of course, to different people, always. But it's quite a key category and a key subject to explore and be involved in the whole kind of religious studies world. I'm going to read just a little bit off the flyer to tell you how important she is. So actually, you spent, it says here, for almost 20 years in the Far East. Is that the right term now? But there we are. Working as a teacher, translator, and interpreter. Yeah. And that's in Singapore a lot. Is that right? There you go. But coming back to the UK, she did a master's study in religion at Oxford and PhD at Warwick University. So she has a great deal of kind of research experience behind this particular subject. And always finds, I think it would be fair to say, that it stimulates people no end. She was the director of communications for the Alistair Hardy Trust. I won't tell you what that is because I think it probably comes up a bit in the talk, we'll see. Alistair Hardy, someone in the early 20th century who asked a very important question in the media world, that's to say newspapers and things, about of the ordinary public to report what kind of religious experience they may have had. And a huge archive has been built up ever since, arising from that question. And I know that you've had quite a lot to do with it. There are some things to see afterwards you want a lot more to read about, and this is her major big fat book, which is very instructive, highly informative, and not puttable, downable. Okay, so you can look at that afterwards and see. I think, are they on sale? They can be. How much is this, Chris? How much? Pounds. £30. 48 on Amazon, but 30 in Reading. Very good. So do check it out, as they say. What we'll do is have some lecture material to begin with, and then some exchange among ourselves on what we've heard and bringing our own thoughts to bear on the subject matter. And after that, there's a bit of a chance for some bit of vino or some and some things to eat over here at the side. So that'll take us into 8:30 easily. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over to you now, I think, and say, off you go. So, Marianne, welcome very much to be with us.
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'll just put that in there. So, thank you for a very warm welcome, Alan. So, So this evening, I will speak about spiritual experiences in general, near-death experiences in particular, and what we can learn from them, especially in relation to religious traditions. I'll also tell the stories of two remarkable individuals, Dame Jane Goodall and Sir Francis Younghusband. What's he called? But, can't really see that. But I want to begin with a question for you. Have you ever been aware of or influenced by a presence or power, whether you call it God or not, which is different from your everyday self? Now this is known as the Hardy question, as it was posed by Sir Alister Hardy in the late 1960s in The Guardian, Observer, Times and the Daily Mail. It was to elicit people's experiences. And I'd like you to think about that question as I speak this evening, please, because I think we might come back to it at the end. For many years, I've been fascinated by spiritual experiences, not just those of religious leaders, mystics or poets, but those of ordinary people who have particular moments of deeper insight or of sudden illumination. What triggers them, and what do they lead to? Here's an example of the kind of experience I mean, taken from an archive which was established by Hardy. I quote, "It seemed to me that in some way I was extending into my surroundings and was becoming one with them. At the same time, I felt a sense of lightness, exhilaration, and power, as if I was beginning to understand the true meaning of the whole universe." And another, "I have had deeply troubled times in my life, including a broken marriage, and have certainly been uplifted and protected by a power to whom I can call upon during times of stress." Next. So who was Sir Alister Hardy? He was a successful mainstream scientist, a biologist, who held professorships at Hull, Aberdeen and Oxford, with a knighthood for his services to marine biology. Yet Hardy had always been interested in spirituality, and at the end of his life, he was awarded the Templeton Prize for Progress in Religion. Hardy thought of humans as spiritual animals and of religious experience as a natural phenomenon of evolutionary value. He felt that humans had a fundamental awareness of a power beyond the self, and that contact with this power was made through people's spiritual experiences, through their awareness of this other dimension. He wanted to study that scientifically and to build up evidence to demonstrate, and I quote Hardy here, one, that religious experience can play an important part in human behavior. Two, that there's certain consistent pattern in the records of such experiences. And three, that on so many occasions, men and women have achieved, by what they call divine help or grace, that which they and others who knew them would have regarded as beyond their normal capabilities. When Hardy posed this question in the popular press, it was the respect with which he was held that gave people the confidence to write to him. He received an overwhelming response from the public about 3,000 letters, which enabled him to set up a research center and to establish an archive of the spiritual experiences of ordinary people. These varied widely and offered him data for research, which he recorded in The Spiritual Nature of Man, published in 1979. The Alistair Hardy Religious Experience Research Centre archive has now grown to over 6,600 accounts, and it's available online. Now, when responding to Hardy, people described events which they considered religious or spiritual, but which they often didn't understand. Many people were sharing them for the very first time, as they'd never even told their spouse for fear of being thought crazy. The correspondents told of how these experiences had changed their lives. Very often this was through receiving answers to prayer, even when they'd been unsure of whomever or whatever they were praying to. Some described being lifted from a state of depression or fear, receiving comfort, feeling loved, or being given guidance in life. As a result of what happened to them, many became more spiritual, although not always more religious in the formal sense. There was such a taboo around the subject that even Sir Alistair himself was 88 years old before he noted down his own experiences, which he had never told anyone about before. Next. He wrote, "Just occasionally, when I was sure no one could see me, I became so overcome with the glory of the natural scene that for a moment or two I fell on my knees in prayer. Not prayer asking for anything, but thanking God, who felt very real to me, for the glories of his kingdom and for allowing me to feel them. It was always by a running waterside that I did this, perhaps in front of a great foam of meadowsweet or a mass of purple loosestrife. But what triggers these experiences? Some people see visions, hear voices, or feel overwhelmed by the beauty of nature, music, poetry, or art, whereas others are affected by religious worship or spiritual practice. Some have a sudden insight which changes their perspective on life and perhaps death, whereas for others it's a more gradual reappraisal of the choices they have made. There are people who have profound mystical experiences of oneness and the interconnectedness of all things. Triggers at the other end of the spectrum may be depression, addiction, heartbreak, a terminal diagnosis, or bereavement. This can lead to people admitting that they cannot cope alone, which can enable them to hand everything over to a power beyond the self, however conceived or named. The Alcoholics Anonymous 12-step program uses this pattern in helping people to cope with addiction. Many religious traditions advocate overcoming the ego, often through worship, spiritual practice, or meditation. For a lot of people, prayer is helpful. Here's what somebody said. When I pray, I'm not praying in a vacuum. There is a response, and I feel that at the time of praying. Otherwise, I think I would just give up. But others reject such experiences, and here's an example. At times of selfishness, I stumble into otherworldliness, When I feel the need to lean on some emotional peg, I suppose some people would call it prayer, but when I catch myself, I stop it by saying, there is no power that can help me. The aspect of subservience disgusts me. But in general, people do feel encouraged and helped by their experiences and are often led to review how they're living. So now we come to the near-death experience. Next. The most dramatic and transformational type of spiritual experience is the near-death experience, or NDE. This illustration shows the Ascent of the Blessed by Hieronymus Bosch, showing the soul approaching union with the divine. And although from the 16th century, this image closely resembles the tunnel in the near-death experience, through which many dying move. So what are NDEs? Well, they begin with the extraordinary experience of looking down at one's own body from above, an out-of-body experience, or OBE, seeing and hearing what's going on, but being unable to communicate. Realization that one has died is followed often by entry into a dark tunnel with a bright, welcoming light at the end. There, the person seems to be met by a being of light and love, and often deceased relatives as well. As the person does not in fact die, it's often at this point that it's made clear that the time is not yet ripe. There's sometimes a barrier, and a return to the body takes place, often against the person's will, and occasionally into pain. Some people, however, go on to experience a life review, where they themselves feel the suffering they have caused others, judging themselves and their behavior. Mercifully, it appears that we also experience the good we have done and the joy we have given, but it's quite a wake-up call. NDEs often take place after accidents, during surgery, or in childbirth. The person is classified as having died, but during the period where the brain is not deemed to be able to function, that person subsequently reports what they saw and heard during that time. Some people see beyond what they would normally be able to see from the physical location of their body, even outside the hospital walls, often reporting happenings which were later verified. These days, we're familiar with NDEs. There are stories about them in the media, and they're accepted as real happenings. Initially, however, the scientific community was highly skeptical of NDEs. And although that reaction to the first accounts has been challenged, we're still undecided about how to interpret them. What do they mean? Do they indicate that consciousness can exist outside the brain? And if so, what does that mean for survival of bodily death? Now, although there have been accounts of NDEs throughout the ages, and there's even one in Plato's Republic, it was the publication of Raymond Moody's Life After Life in 1975, which brought the subject to popular notice. It was he who coined the term near-death experience. Moody, who was a physician and philosopher, studied 150 cases for that groundbreaking book. These were instances of people who had clinically died, but who nonetheless had coherent experiences before being resuscitated. It's estimated that between 12 and 20% of patients who are revived after being clinically dead report an NDE. And since then, a number of studies have been undertaken, recording the most common features of the experience. Next, please. Groundbreaking research was undertaken some years ago by Dr. Pim van Lommel in Holland. He was a practicing cardiologist, and he led a 13-year prospective study of 344 cardiac arrest patients in 10 hospitals, of whom 41 reported NDEs. The results were published in the prestigious English medical journal, The Lancet, and it was published in 2001. And it was a major breakthrough in the admission by scientists and medical practitioners that NDEs were real, not hallucinations, not linked to drugs or medication, nor the result of anoxia. Now you see there Pim van Lommel's results. Awareness of being dead, 56%. Out-of-body experience, 24%. Moving through a tunnel, 31%. Communication with the light, 23%. Observation of colors, 23%. Observation of celestial landscape, 29%. Meeting with deceased persons, 32%. 13% had a life review, and 8% reached a border. Now, Pim van Lommel has now given up cardiology to study consciousness. He considers that the brain does not produce consciousness, which would entail that on death, consciousness would cease. He believes that the brain operates like a transmitter of an underlying primary non-local consciousness, which exists apart from the body. He uses the analogy of a TV, which does not create the program, but receives and transmits it. And that interpretation would allow for survival of consciousness beyond physical death. Next. In recent years, there have been many studies of NDEs by Peter and Elizabeth Fennick, Bruce Grayson, Sam Parnia, Mark Fox, and Penny Sartori, among others. The International Association for Near-Death Studies, IANDS, was founded in 1981 by leading researchers to provide information and education about NDEs and to offer support to those who've had them. There are also some fascinating accounts of people's experiences, such as Eben Alexander's Proof of Heaven, a neurosurgeon's journey into the afterlife, where he recounts what happened to him during his week-long coma and what he learnt from it. He too changed from being a reductive materialist scientist, believing that the brain produced consciousness and that this life is all there is, to viewing the brain as a transceiver, and life itself as far more rich and complex than we can imagine. Most NDEs are positive, but there are also accounts of terrifying experiences, although in many cases the person travels through the darkness into light and the initial fear is transcended. One such account is that of Dr. Rajiv Parthi. He was chief of anesthesiology at the Bakersfield Heart Hospital in California. He wrote about his NDE in Dying to Wake Up, a doctor's voyage into the afterlife and the wisdom he brought back. And that was published in 2016. He describes an initial OBE, watching his body being operated on. But he then tells of finding himself in a dark, frightening environment which he later interpreted as reflecting his own moral and emotional state at the time. He was accompanied by his deceased father through previous lives, and he gained an understanding of a pattern of violence in his family throughout the generations. He recounts experiencing a panoramic review of his life, particularly moments where he acted selfishly, neglected compassion, pursued wealth over service, and he also describes feeling the emotional impact of his actions on others. But then he reports encountering a radiant, loving presence, characterized by unconditional love, understanding, and acceptance. Dr. Party changed his life completely after his NDE. He resigned his lucrative post to focus on consciousness-based healing, and he sold his large mansion and luxury cars, replacing them with a more modest lifestyle. Most important of all, he repaired his relationships with his family, in particular with his son, having understood the pattern of being demanding and the abuse seen in his father and repeated in his own mistreatment of his son. So NDEs don't seem to lead to any specific religion, but to a deeper spiritual awareness and heightened moral principles. The research center established by Hardy had a number of accounts describing an NDE before the term was known, and we receive them to this day. Here's an example. I suppose this experience molded something in my life. I was only a child when it happened, only 10. But now, my entire life through, I am thoroughly convinced that there is life after death, without a shadow of a doubt, and I'm not afraid to die. I'm not. Some people I've known are so afraid, so scared. I always smile to myself when I hear people doubt that there's an afterlife or say, when you're dead, you're gone. I think to myself, they really don't know. A friend of mine had an NDE 6 years ago, in which she left her hospital bed in the resuscitation unit and found herself in the most beautiful countryside. She described feeling free as the air, light, young, in her prime. And she saw her beloved mother, also in her prime, across a road which blocked her path. She saw other relatives too, before she suddenly returned to her hospital bed. She says that the joyous feeling of freedom, lightness in weight, and the surrounding radiant beauty was almost beyond words. And she's convinced that we have nothing to fear. Carl Jung experienced an NDE during a heart attack he suffered in 1944. And he wrote, "What happens after death is so unspeakably glorious that our imagination and our feelings do not suffice to form even an approximate conception of it." So although not proof of life after death, almost all those who have had NDEs no longer fear dying, but have gained an understanding of a transition from one reality to another. On their return to life on Earth, these people frequently live completely transformed lives. The experience leads them to a more spiritual, less materialistic attitude, with greater compassion for their fellows, and many changed to more caring professions. The NDEs have opened a window on eternity, given us a new perspective on life and death, and a hopeful one at that. There are accounts of pain being transformed into bliss, the darkness of a tunnel leading to a loving light, meetings with deceased loved ones whom we thought gone forever, an overview of and reflection on our lives here on earth, ending with a return to the body, but now with an awareness of realms beyond this world. It's no wonder that people are never the same after an NDE. But what do you think would happen if a seasoned skeptical philosopher had an NDE? Well, it happened. The atheist philosopher A.J. Ayer, who held that religious claims were meaningless because they're not empirically verifiable, he had an NDE in old age. He saw a red light, which seemed to him to be responsible for the government of the universe. His first response was to say that, on the face of it, these experiences are rather strong evidence that death does not put an end to consciousness. However, after rehearsing some of the philosophical problems associated with life after death, his conclusion was more modest, namely that my recent experiences have slightly weakened my conviction that my genuine death, which is due fairly soon, will be the end of me, though I continue to hope it will. He also added that the experience had not weakened his conviction that there's no God. So clearly, the NDE does not have a spiritually transforming effect in every case. The findings from the studies of NDEs link into a wider religious perspective. That life continues after physical death is a view found in all the major religious traditions, including Christianity, Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Sikhism, Baha'i, and the Brahma Kumaris, to name but a few. They do not consider that this life is all there is. One way of looking at the many religious traditions of the world is to consider the spiritual experiences of the founders. The Buddha, Abraham, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad all had profound experiences which transformed their lives and those of their followers. Rather less well known are the experiences of Guru Nanak, the founder and first guru of the Sikh religion. Another is the founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, and also Dada Lekraj of the Brahma Kumaris. Other visionaries have inspired religious movements too. And actually, the word mediator or messenger may be preferred to founder, as these inspirational teachers are seen as mediating the divine to humans. Those revered figures acquired followers during their lifetimes, which led to the establishment of traditions after their death. Their experiences are then commemorated by the following generations. Their teachings are retained, their wisdom revered, and their conduct continues to offer a pattern of exemplary behavior to follow. The different religious traditions may be considered as various paths up a mountain, compatible but varied approaches to the same ultimate reality. This approach has benefits, a focus on cooperation and learning from each other, rather than on differences of theology. When living in Singapore, I was surrounded by a range of different religions, and we all rubbed along well. We took delight in learning about and from each other, and celebrating each other's festivals. And this meant that throughout the year, there was always some special commemoration going on and some delicious traditional delicacies to try. Next. The mystics in all traditions urge us to look beyond individual revelations, to focus on the moon, not the finger pointing to it. Here's an example of a mystical experience and the transformation it led to. I find it difficult to describe my experience, only to say that it seems to be outside of me and enormous, and yet at the same time I am part of it. Everything is. It's purely personal and helps me to live and love others. It's difficult to describe, but in some way, because of this feeling, I feel united to all people, to all living things. And of recent years, the feeling has become so strong that I'm now training to become a social worker, because I find that I must help people. In some way, I feel their unhappiness as my own. So spiritual awareness can lead to an understanding of the world as one, an experience of the links between us and our fellow beings, as well as the whole planet and the universe. And this perspective frequently leads to love and compassion for others, perhaps just what we need in this day and age, when there are so many threats to peace and to the survival of the natural world. So now let's consider two people whose lives were changed by their spiritual experiences. Dr. Jane Goodall. Towards the end of last year, we lost a wonderful human being, Jane Goodall, one of the world's most respected scientists and conservationists. She was renowned for transforming our understanding of animals, humanity, and our relationship to the natural world. She observed chimpanzees making and using tools, challenging the idea that tool use was uniquely human. She also documented their complex emotional lives, including affection, jealousy, cooperation, and violence, reshaping the fields of primatology and anthropology. Jane Goodall became a powerful advocate for environmental conservation, animal welfare, and peace. Spiritually, she often spoke of a profound sense of awe, reverence, and an awareness of the interconnectedness of life. While not aligned to any single religion, she described herself as deeply spiritual, seeing hope as rooted in compassion, humility, and responsibility towards the planet. Before she died, she said, "My next great adventure, aged 90, is going to be dying. There's either nothing or something. If there's nothing, there's nothing. That's it. If there's something, I can't think of a greater adventure than finding out what it is. I happen to think there is something because of the experiences I've had, because of experiences other people have had, very powerful ones." Well, now she knows. Here's one of her mystical experiences in her own beautiful words, quoted from her autobiographical book, Reason for Hope, A Spiritual Journey. And I'm quoting Jane now. "Lost in awe at the beauty around me, I must have slipped into a state of heightened awareness. It's hard, impossible really, to put into words the moment of truth that suddenly came upon me then. Even the mystics are unable to describe their brief flashes of spiritual ecstasy. It seemed to me, as I struggled afterward to recall the experience, the self was utterly absent. I and the chimpanzees, the earth and trees and air seemed to merge to become one with the spirit power of life itself. That afternoon, it had been as though an unseen hand had drawn back a curtain, and for the briefest moment, I had seen through such a window. I had known timelessness and quiet ecstasy, sensed a truth of which mainstream science is merely a small fraction. And I knew that the revelation would be with me for the rest of my life, imperfectly remembered, yet always within, a source of strength on which I could draw when life seemed harsh or cruel or desperate. All the time, I was getting closer to animals and nature, and as a result, closer to myself and more in tune with the spiritual power that I felt all around. So here the link between spiritual experience and its effect on the approach of the end of life is clear. Such was her impact that on what would have been Jane's 92nd birthday this year, on April the 3rd, the Jane Goodall Institute is to celebrate Jane Goodall Day, encouraging us all to take action, big or small, to benefit people, animals, and our shared environment. Another extraordinary character who was changed by a spiritual experience is Sir Francis Younghusband. He was the founder of the World Congress of Faiths. He was a military figure, a colonel, whose life was changed by an experience in Tibet. Francis Younghusband's biography was written by Patrick French, who vividly describes Younghusband's life of adventure, how he had explored Central Asia, finding a new route across the Gobi Desert, and had led an unauthorized military invasion of Tibet. Younghusband's life was changed by a vision, which took place after he had ridden off alone towards the mountains. He dismounted to sit on a rock and described being suffused with the most intense, inexplicable joy. The experience remained pivotal for him, and years later he wrote, "There came upon me what was far more than elation or exhilaration. I was beside myself with an intensity of joy such as even the joy of first love can give only a faint foreshadowing of. And with this indescribable joy came a revelation of the essential goodness of the world. I was convinced, past all refutation, that men were good at heart, that the evil in them was superficial. In short, that men at heart were divine." A later experience of the power of the Spirit confirmed Younghusband in his spiritual quest. It left him feeling like, in his words, a clear sky after a storm. He subsequently spent much of his time speaking and writing on spiritual matters, and ultimately set up the World Congress of Faiths, an interfaith organization which is still going strong. His aim was to foster understanding and unity among world religions, not to create a new synthetic faith, but to deepen individual faith through a shared spiritual quest for truth. After years of preparation, he convened the first World Congress of Faiths in London in 1936 to promote fellowship and spiritual understanding. Attendees included esteemed figures like D.T. Suzuki and Sarvepalli Radhakrishnan. The goal was to encourage dialogue and deepen faith by learning from others, not to blend religions into one, but to foster understanding and unity. To this day, the WCF arranges interfaith gatherings, dialogue, studies, and activities, particularly reflected in its biannual journal, Interreligious Insight. Next. Spiritual experiences offer a light in the darkness, a glimpse of the beyond. It may be a result of religious practice or come as a sudden shaft of illumination. It seems that we can open ourselves up to a spiritual power which can support us in times of trial. For some people, this leads to religious worship or practice. Others simply feel led to a deeper response to life. We begin to understand the interconnected nature of the world in which we live, our essential oneness, which leads to an increased feeling of love and compassion for our fellows. NDEs are particularly dramatic and often lead to profound changes in people as they are offered a glimpse of another dimension, a new perspective on life and death, a glimpse beyond the veil. So to conclude, I will return to the Hardy question. Some years ago, I used to give talks to sixth forms, and at the end, I would pose the Hardy question. Now, to avoid their shy response as they looked around to see if anybody else might say yes, I asked them to close their eyes. And that resulted in about a third or half of positive responses. Well, I wonder what your response would be. I'm not going to inquire. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marion. I'm sat there thinking now I've had a bit of an out-of-body experience myself, just listening to such a wonderful presentation. Very accessible, but very challenging. Challenging to many basic assumptions about who we are, about what consciousness is, about whether there is such a thing called God, to use that word, or spiritual awareness. So, time for some questions, responses, maybe some accounts of your own. If you've just been asked the Hardy question for the first time, now is your chance to let us hear your answer to it. Okay, so over to you, to us. Either just a response which may require another response from you,
okay,
or it may not, we'll see. Okay, I've got a mic here which I can bring round. Okay, we've got the front row.
This is not a personal experience, but I have heard people talk about visiting those close to the end of their lives and suffering from complete dementia, and that they have some experience of lucidity immediately before death, which suggests that our memory does carry on beyond consciousness. I mean, consciousness carries on beyond the brain, which I feel, is a wonderful experience, and I'm so delighted, knowing that my own body and my own brain are crumbling very fast. It's rather wonderful to think that our memory and our consciousness is part of some future.
Yeah.
What's your experience of that?
Well, I've read about this before, and I was with my mother when she died, but she didn't have dementia, but so there wasn't that transition. But I've read about those transitions. Also, many people who are sitting with dying, just before the dying person actually dies, suddenly they sit up and they wave. They they're making contact with somebody. And in fact, I was talking about going to give this talk to somebody, and they told me this story. And well, she said, I think she was meeting her dead relatives, maybe her mother or father again. But people suddenly sort of seem to communicate with something beyond, which they are responding to, and it's usually good. You know, they're happy to see these people whom they thought gone forever. And my friend's NDE that I read out, you know, she saw her mother, even though she couldn't get to her because there was the road in the way. Now, it's extraordinary, but I find them uplifting. You know, I got into it because I was terrified of death. I wouldn't walk past a entrance to a cemetery or anything, and I wouldn't discuss with my parents what the time that would eventually come when they were no longer there. I wouldn't talk about it. But so what to do? Study it. So there we are.
Thank you. Wow.
Thank you. Well, I used to be a hospital chaplain, and very often when I was called to families where their loved one was about to die, very often the person who was dying would look up, and there was a great sense of peace before they passed on. The other thing I'd like to briefly share with you is that I also had to spend quite a lot of time as a psychiatric chaplain, and I can remember sitting with a female service user, and she had attempted to take her life. She had a near-death experience, and she told me that as she went into this place, there was lots of darkness, and she said, I could hear a voice there, she said, and I said, I'm unworthy. I've done some terrible things in my life. I'm not worth taking time with. And as she was in this experience, gradually this voice was saying, well, you helped so-and-so, you did this, you did that. And as this voice was saying those things, the room became brighter and brighter and brighter. And it did have an effect on her life. And right up to when I last saw her, she never, ever, ever tried to self-abuse and herself. And she actually managed to get a job and settle down really well. Yeah.
What a wonderful, wonderful event to share with us. Thank you. That's really amazing, isn't it? There's so much we don't understand, I feel, always when I've been reading things like this.
Hello,
Hi.
Caddy here. The closest I've come to that, okay, some members of the church know, around about November time, when my godfather was passing away, we saw him the day before. He lives in Brighton. And because he was fighting cancer, and he knew. For some reason, he knew. And the day before he passed away, he said to us, oh, this is the last time I'm going to see you. And everybody just looked at each other like, what are you talking about? And he said, oh no, I'm serious. This is the last time I'm going to see you. And my godmother, who is his wife, Angie, said to him, why did you say that? He said, oh, because it's my time. My parents are here. They're waiting for me. And I'm done. I've had the good fight.
Yes.
I'm done. I'm ready. And we just thought he plays pranks all the time. He was known for that. So we just kind of ignored him and just carried on. But then the night he passed away, we were all in bed. We woke up in the morning, and Angie called and said, Richard was serious. He's actually gone. And honest to God, I felt like he was in the room with us, and he's telling us, don't you dare cry. Because it's like he gave us his final goodbye, and he's told us, like, I'm done.
Yeah.
He even said to us, my body's given up.
Wow.
It's time for me to move on. And that's my closest experience to that. And for some reason, none of us were sad
Yes.
because we got to see him say a lively goodbye the day before.
Yeah.
And none of us were sad about that. We just felt, oh, finally he can rest,
Yeah.
you know.
Wonderful story. Thank you. Apparently we do have some sort of control over when we die. It was his time. He was ready. Now, sometimes I've heard of people who were dying in England and the son was coming back from Australia and the father wouldn't go until the son came to the bedside, and then he could let go. So there's some element, perhaps, of timing.
Yeah, I've heard those stories too.
So this near-death experience thing, I was reading a book by, I don't know if you guys know Dr. Gary Chapman. He wrote The 5 Love Languages.
Right.
I mean, he said for 12 years, he and his wife lived like cats and dogs. And he had an encounter. I don't know, perhaps this was a near-death experience. I don't know what it was, but it was probably very serious.
Yeah.
And during that encounter, he was introduced to his other self, similar to Paul when he met his other self during his encounter, and he was completely transformed. I mean, I call it a almost permanent transformation. So this near-death experience, I think sometimes we go through our life not paying attention or noticing the other half of ourselves, which is, I like to call it the God self.
Yeah, or the higher self.
There's the ego self and the pure self.
Yeah.
And there may be an experience, it doesn't have to be a near-death experience, but it seems to happen, be more profound during a near-death experience, when you're introduced to that part of yourself. And the result is that there's a powerful transition that happened. So, transition into the next life seems like it becomes blissful, if you know what I mean. So I think the near-death experience is sometimes when you're introduced to that other half of yourself, when the two selves are united, if you like.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, some people actually have the near-death experience to wake them up. And others, it just comes through a bit more gently, more slowly. But what has to happen is that transformation. Suddenly you realize, oh my goodness, I've not been behaving well here. I've got to change. But it has to come from deep within. And that sometimes near death or other profound spiritual experiences, like I mentioned. Yeah, he's... Yeah, he's an interesting chap, Deepak Chopra. Yeah, we don't.
Any other points, queries, experiences, things to say? Oh, good.
How are we doing?
Carola was to speak.
2 questions, actually. You said you're someone who got into this probably even afraid to walk past a graveyard. So 1, how did you decide that this is what you would study? It could be completely, unrelated, wanted to become a doctor, couldn't, but how did you come to it? And second, tell us a bit more about the book.
Oh, okay. Well, because I was always concerned about death, what is life about? I was an asthmatic child. So in the daytime I had trouble breathing. I had to focus. I had to consciously make myself breathe. So as a child I thought, well, what's going to happen at night then when I'm not concentrating? Will I die? So I was aware of death very early on, I suppose. And as I say, I had this sort of phobia. I wouldn't engage with it at all. So I thought, so is there something else? So I joined the Society for Psychical Research to see, right, what do psychics say? Are mediums really engaging with people who've died? all that sort of end of life. I wanted these liminal experiences. I wanted to study them to find out just, you know, what are we? What is life? What's death? So right in there with all the big questions. So I joined the Society for Psychical Research, and along with their literature one time came a flyer from the Alistair Hardy Trust. And I thought, so who are these people saying they're having spiritual experiences? What's that all about? And then I joined them and was with them for many, many years, as Alan said, eventually their Director of Communications. I've just always been interested in this whole thing. What is life? What is death? What are religions for? Especially in Singapore, when I first got there were so many religions. I thought, are they all right? Are they all wrong? Do we need any of them? You know, so it was quite a journey, really. So my book, there are flyers there. That's probably the easiest way to explain. The book looks at spiritual experiences of different kinds, of different people. I look at some celebrities like Eric Clapton and Cat Stevens, and on the music scene, and Aung San Suu Kyi, and you know, various people. But I also look at different types of spiritual experience. NDEs are in there, but there is a flyer which gives you the chapter titles. And I wrote the book really. There's a shorter one as well, a bit cheaper. I wrote the book because there was no comprehensive introduction to spiritual experience. So I wrote the short paper, and I had too much material, and I thought, actually, there's more I want to say about this. So I wrote the book, and the idea of it really is for students or people who are interested in spiritual experiences and don't know quite where to start looking. So I've written in short sections, and each section introduces you to some aspect of spiritual experience, which you can then Google and find out more about. That's how I did it. And it took 9 months, just like having a baby.
Anybody else? Let me ask something. If I may.
Complex now.
No. We, you know, there is skepticism about spiritual experience or about religion and so on generally. A lot of that, it seems to me, is often articulated in terms of, well, you know, we explain things that happen in life by reference to other things that happen alongside us in some, call it scientific kind of way, if you like, empirical sense, such that, you know, we don't think there's any need for a God explanation of things. This is an old kind of philosophical conundrum, really. But I wonder if, would you say that these experiences are about a dawning sort of awareness, or would you use the language of intervention? Or, you know, in the discussion, there's a lot of discussion about these things, isn't there, in the literature, in the discussions about it. Because I suspect that many people would be happier with the notion of an awareness about one's place in life or at the end of life, rather than, as we were saying, you know, God has intervened in some way. If you're in the tunnel, I don't know whether that's God intervening or whether you're becoming aware of something. Or whether that's even a proper difference. Maybe it's
the tunnel
talking of the same thing using different words.
Change of dimension, perhaps. I would say an awareness of a deeper dimension. It seemed to me that a lot of the people whom I've been quoting actually did become aware of a deeper dimension, but whether that was sort of intervention, I don't know. I think some people feel it as such, as intervention.
Some of the things you spoke about were interventionistic.
They don't want to think this way, but they're not allowed not to in some way.
Yeah.
There's intervention sometimes, I think. There is a power there which makes you focus on something which may not be comfortable for you, but it won't go. It won't leave you, you know, and that, in that sense, it's awareness and intervention at the same time, in a way. It's all very difficult to talk about in many ways. I mean, sometimes I think, why have I decided to do this and not talked about the history of London or something simple? You know, but that doesn't exercise me. This does.
You could ask your husband that question. Have you answered to your wife's question?
Was he still listening?
I don't think we've got enough time, Al.
He says we haven't got enough time. I think that's a cop-out. But,
he's very loyally supporting here. So.
I read, let me just follow up with something a bit similar, the same kind of thing.
Yeah.
There was, what was his name? David Hay was a fellow who did a lot of empirical research about spiritual experiences among the kind of individuals in the ordinary population.
Yes.
Who would describe themselves yes or no religious as such, but you know, put the hardy question to them. And over a long period of time, he discovered, I think I'm right, that towards the end of his time of doing all of this, society as such had shifted quite a lot in a more secular direction. But at the same time, he found that more people were prepared to talk about these things because of a more secular context, mainly because they didn't feel they had to interpret them in some standard religious kinds of ways, using Christian language or Hindu language or whatever language. Is that right?
Yeah.
And that seemed to me a very kind of interesting thing. I don't know why, but it was another route into the discussion.
He also found that although church attendance was going down, records of spiritual experience were going up in a much more open way.
People were more willing to admit it.
And
it didn't seem so extraordinary or wacky.
And as you were saying, they didn't feel they had to slot it into an existing religious tradition. And I think that's going on still.
Right.
We're opening up. If I talk about spirituality, I get engagement. If I mention religion, no. So, you know. I used both words in the title of my book because religious experience was on the curriculum for hoping to catch some students at school or university, and spirituality was what I really was interested in. So I put both on my title. Yeah.
Anybody else? Sonia wants to have a thought here. Got to let the vicar in.
Reach over. Thanks, Marianne. It was really, really interesting. And I could probably be bold as to say that experience is my favourite source of theology. So I'm really captivated by your talk tonight. And it's great to meet you because I've read your book. I can recommend it. And I've just finished a piece of research, as you know a little bit about. And part of that research, I was looking at, I interviewed 9 people about their interreligious encounter with someone of a faith tradition different from their own. And one of the things that came up was an experience of God and or transcendence as a result of that encounter with somebody else. So I just wondered, and that was quite prominent for at least 7 of the research participants, so it was fairly prominent, and they used language like you've used this evening, you know, feeling a kind of sense of oneness with the universe, and as a result of meeting somebody else from another tradition, and also just those kind of feelings, really, of sort of a oneness with the universe and that which we may call God, using different language. But I wondered whether there was any recordings of having that kind of sense of oneness as a result of meeting with somebody else in the Alistair Hardy archives or anything since, because that's something that came up in my research. So the trigger point in my research was encountering God, or that which we may call God, or transcendence or transcendence, as a result of meeting another human being.
Yes.
So I just wondered whether there was. I'm probably asking too late. It probably should be in my research, but
No, that is fascinating. Yeah. I joined the Alistair Hardy Society when I was living in Singapore, so I didn't know any of the people. But I liked what they were saying, I liked what they wrote. And it wasn't until I came back to live in this country that I started to meet the people. And I thought, gosh, they're quite ordinary, really. And highly intelligent and perfectly okay, which I wasn't sure when I was just reading what they had written. But when I met them, and there were one or two very special people who just reflected that sort of spiritual awareness in their everyday lives. And that was quite noticeable in them. And then you notice when it's not there. But I did wonder, actually, looking back at my book sort of many, many years on, it was published in 2008, and I thought, I didn't deal with what you've dealt with, actually dealing with the meetings. And I thought that's a whole nother subject, because you've got all different kinds of relationships. You've got sort of all different types of love, different types of being a teacher or taught or helped in life or supported. It would be another whole book. So, on you go, and you write your book and take it from where you've started now and then just go on with it. It would be wonderful, because that is a very important way. And of course, you've also got the guru and disciple thing. You've got all different balances in this whole thing. Some people acquire followers, and that doesn't do them any good, I've found. They can get quite sort of up themselves, which isn't very spiritual. I do think that not going too far with your own ego is quite important. So, yeah, I mean, it would be a fascinating study. Keep going. Keep going.
I think on that note,
right,
it's 8:15, thereabouts, and we ought to draw to a close. Be a different way of our keeping going. But I've also been kind of wondering, where do you fit this kind of study or discussion? Where does it fit in the normal ways in which we, arrange a curriculum of some kind? Is this science? Is it religion? Is this philosophy? Is it consciousness studies?
I know.
You see what I mean? It doesn't seem to fit the normal kind of ways. Is it psychology? Is it brains? What is it?
It's got feet in everything.
It touches all of those places, which, in a way, it seems to me has got a lot going for it. So I was interested in the Alistair Hardy definition of being human as a spiritual animal.
Yeah, well, he was a biologist.
And that's what I mean. But I mean, that combines the two things, doesn't it? If you like, science and religion, put it like that.
Yeah.
So that, for me, comes out as a kind of something to ponder a bit more, really. Where do you place it? Is it its own animal, or does it belong in some other category? It escapes categories. We're on the cusp here of knowledge or not knowledge, isn't it, really? So thank you for getting us into that and opening up all the kind of fascinating study that you've been involved with for many years, I know. So, just another plug for the book here. If this one goes, which seems to be the only one there.
There are two.
Oh, there are two. There's another one here. They can talk to you about how to get hold of one. Is that right? And there are other little bits to purchase here. Two things now. One is there are always expenses on these occasions. This is an empty basket. If you want to help in, taking away its emptiness, it's a Buddhist basket right now, full of emptiness. I want it to be a Western basket, full of some to help us out with expenses. That's all I'm saying. If you can manage it. Oh, there is the machine at the back for card people, yes. Yes, that's a very good point. The machine will take it, and it's very easy to operate. Okay. So now you're invited for a little bit of refreshments over here. You might have had your dinner before you came out, but now's the time to top it up. So do come and stay, join in the conversation. Nobble Marianne for a bit longer if you like. But I know they have to go at some point. Your train is at 9 o'clock, is that right? 9:15. Oh, we're bags of time. Okay, so we're fine. So please do come and join in and continue the conversation. Thanks very much.